Hi, I'm Dr. Rachael Grimaldi, co-founder and CEO of Cardmedic and an NHS anaesthetist. I think effective communication is absolutely vital to delivering personalised care. A lot of what we do in healthcare is relatively standardised. The information that we impart to patients when we're asking a history, we're explaining investigations, procedures, doing examination and so on, or giving a diagnosis. But actually on the receiving end of that is each time a completely individual, unique person coming with their own experience, their own thoughts, worries, ideas, concerns for the future, expectations about what might happen, and the family that they might have or their close friends, and the impact on what's happening to them, whether it's something elective or emergency or something life-changing or something exciting maybe that's happening as well in their life, for example, bringing a new life into the world and so on. But on the receiving end of that, despite a lot of what we deliver being relatively routine or standardized, we need to think about that whole person in front of us. Who are they? What makes them tick? What are they interested in? What hobbies do they have? What work do they do, for example? Are they studying? Do they stay at home? And so on. And we've got to really think about that when we deliver information to them, making it in such a way that they understand. So whether that's in their own language, if they don't speak English as a first language, for example, whether they are hearing impaired, whether they have a learning disability, whether they have any cognitive impairment, they've had a stroke, for example, or dementia, and so on. And to make sure that the information we provide them makes sense to them, despite any communication barriers that they might have or may not have, and is also really culturally sensitive. So it's taking into account what their background is, what their beliefs are, and so on, to make sure that it's as personalised and as relevant to them as possible. I think there are a whole range of barriers exist to effective communication in clinical practice, and I think that can be either focused around actual communication barriers. For example, that could be a language barrier, maybe cognitive impairment, sensory impairment like visual impairment or hearing impairment, or maybe someone has a learning disability, for example. Or it could just be that staff are really, really busy, and just as much as they want to spend hours with a patient going through having certain conversations or going through explanations of a diagnosis, for example, or treatment options, they don't always have that time because they are really, really pressed for time and clinical commitments, and with waiting lists being so long and backlogs for operations and so on, people don't always have the time to spare to go through that. And so I think that's also a barrier in and of itself, if you just are too pressed for time to talk through a conversation in detail with a patient, and then things are rushed or perhaps not explained clearly enough, or the patient isn't given a chance to ask questions or listen to those answers, or the fact that, for example, GPs are so pressed for time and they have to see sometimes nearly 200 patients a day, depending where they work or the hours that they're doing. It's a huge amount to ask of a clinician, and they just physically simply don't have the time to communicate effectively as much as they might try. So I think it ranges from actual communication barriers to more logistical systems-based barriers. And then sometimes you just don't have communication support services available, like telephone translators or interpreters or video, for example, or in person. So you've arranged for someone and they haven't shown up, or you're trying to get hold of someone on the end of the phone and they're just not there because there isn't someone in that service that speaks that language that you need at that moment in time, for example. It might be out of hours, or there might only be a few people in the country that are professional interpreters for a specific language that are needed at any given time. So I think it's probably a whole range of things, but probably categorize it into those three areas in my mind. So I think the health inequalities for this group of patients who have communication barriers and that the outcomes are so much worse, health inequalities are massively exacerbated. And this group of patients have increased morbidity and mortality, they're less compliant with medication, they have more mental health issues, they stay longer in hospital, or they're more likely to be readmitted to hospital. If they're seen in community by the ambulance service, for example, they're more likely to be taken to hospital, and so on. And litigation for this group of patients is much higher as well. So there's a study in the US which demonstrated 30% of medical litigation is directly due to poor communication in healthcare. So the flip side of that is that effective communication for this group of patients is so vitally important for their experience and their safety, but also to reducing health inequities and improving their outcomes. So I think there's a huge place for technology and digital in improving the delivery of healthcare and supporting effective communication, whether that's ranging from augmented alternative communication, for example, that speech and language therapists use, or learning disability nurses, to, as we mentioned, the sort of telephone or video translators or interpreters if they're available, and so on. But fully aware that not everyone has access to digital or has access to technology or smart devices or iPads. And so for us at Cardmedic, that's really important. We are very aware of that group of patients as well, and ensuring that we do everything that we can to support staff to communicate effectively with patients across a whole range of barriers. And one of the things at Cardmedic that people really value is that we have this library of scripts that replicate what staff and patients commonly talk about, but they're available in 49 languages, and we have easy read versions, for example, or read aloud and so on. And so staff can access that just at the click of a button, use it at the point of care wherever they're communicating with a patient. And then the patient can look at it as well in a format that they understand and makes sense to them. And then afterwards, patients can refer back to that information as well. And so I think the digital not only supports that immediate interaction between staff and patients, but also afterwards, the ability for patients to retain information after an interaction with staff. The majority of information is usually forgotten, and that's just because patients are often seen, it's busy, it's usually a bit stressful and anxious when you're going to see a healthcare or allied healthcare professional. And if you're not clinically trained, sometimes there's a lot of information to take on board and it's easy to forget. And then as time goes on, the amount of information that's retained just drops off. And so the ability for people actually to utilize digital technology and to go back and see that information again and again, to refresh their memory, to show their family and their loved ones or their friends, for example, is so important. I think ensuring that we harness that, but in the simplest way possible to minimize any barriers for staff and patients, I think is really one of the most powerful features of digital technology in this space. I think moving forwards for the NHS, personalised care is vitally important. We're dealing with a much bigger population, an ageing population, and a population with more comorbidities who are living a lot longer and potentially with far more complex medical conditions to manage. And for each of those patients, as I mentioned before, every patient is unique, their journey is unique, their life story is unique, and their medical background, the medical picture is unique as well. So there is no one-size-fits-all solution to care, to preventative medicine, and to treating patients once they have a condition as well. So I think enabling personalised care is so important for the patient experience as they navigate this potentially complex journey through the NHS, and also to really empower patients, to give them choices about where they might go to receive their care. For example, it might be that there's somewhere more convenient to them, or somewhere that they have a relationship with a certain staff member, for example, or somewhere that's a centre of excellence that they'd like to go to for a certain condition. And so when it comes to either communicating one-on-one with patients to bigger considerations around where they might get treated, I think enabling patients to be empowered and to have choices around those aspects of their care is really, really important to enable the NHS to navigate this space that we're in now, which is a really difficult one of supporting a much bigger population and a more medically complex population than we had historically. So yeah, I think personalised care is vitally important for the system and for patients as well. So with Cardmedic, you're able to upload your name and your occupation, for example, so you can introduce yourself to patients. We have a whole library of scripts covering all sorts of specialties and subspecialties, with over 1,000 scripts already, probably over 1,200 scripts now actually. And we have a patient section as well, where patients can ask lots of questions of staff, and we of course use Cardmedic to support taking a history or explaining a procedure or a diagnosis and investigation and so on. We always give patients the opportunity to ask questions as well, including the option to say, would you like to have an interpreter? So when, for example, we're there to bridge gaps in service provision, and we're also there as well, we can be used instead of other services if it's something that is frequently talked about, for example. But we always support the use of interpreting services as well, because it is so important. Again, another aspect to just personalising care and effective communication. So with Cardmedic, it's just about ensuring that the patient's voice is heard, that they're empowered to communicate back, they understand what staff are saying to them, staff can introduce themselves so patients know who they're talking to, and it reduces patients' anxiety, it makes them feel involved in a conversation and improves their confidence when talking to staff. And we've done a service evaluation around this with University Hospital Sussex and the University of Brighton as well, which showed an improved patient confidence when talking to staff, particularly through PPE in that context, but when Cardmedic was used. So Cardmedic's priority to deliver personalised care is very much at the heart of what we're offering. The core of what we do is we really want to reduce health inequalities through improving communication with patients and giving patients a voice and putting them at the centre of shared decision making. And so that ethos has followed through in the way in which we've designed Cardmedic. We have ensured that it's intuitive, it's easy to use, it's sort of plug and play, you can pick it up and run with it. It's really light touch. From an IT perspective, we just don't want big barriers to use for anyone, and just to ensure that we get it into the hands of as many staff and patients as possible. And as part of that, we're now on the NHS Innovation Accelerator as well, and the NHS Clinical Entrepreneur Programme, with a view to scaling across the NHS for those reasons. And in terms of our design as well, we work with national charities to get feedback from patients and their carers as well. So Include is our charity partner for patients with learning disabilities. We've worked with other national charities, including Alzheimer's Society and Parkinson's UK. Headway is another charity, and several others, to get feedback from patients and their carers around the use of Cardmedic, and we've integrated that feedback as part of the features that we've got. And so we really listen to patients and carers who we work with to ensure that the way in which we design Cardmedic is as helpful and effective and intuitive for patients and carers as possible. And also to ensure that the scripts that we've got, for example, we work with staff, many of whom work with refugees and asylum seekers, so we have a section on how the NHS works, etc. So really for us is so important ensuring that we communicate effectively with patients, that they're provided with all sorts of information that they need to help them navigate healthcare safely, and also thinking about it from a design perspective, that we've made it as helpful and easy to use as possible.